Welcome to Evil Done Badly, the worst true crime podcast on the internet. We're back today with a listener requested topic, the Zodiac Killer. Thanks to Jeff G for writing in and suggesting it. On an unrelated note, check out the relics on March 4th, 2023 at the West End Club. They're awesome and they put off a great show. We have another Evil Done Badly first here, folks. As you probably know, the Zodiac case is officially unsolved, and we've never had an episode where we couldn't single out a solitary cunt. There's a few theories that imply, some very convincingly, that someone may have been the cunt who went ahead and perpetrated these murders, but there's nothing 100% definitive. Way smarter people than me have been poring over these crimes for years, and they haven't solved the case. So there's a very, very low chance that we'll be any closer to solving it after I'm done with it. There's a lot to this story, so we will just jump right in there. I'm just kidding with you. We're going to cue the theme song, and then there's going to be some other assorted time-wasting nonsense. I'm glad to have you along. This episode is sponsored by the Age-Related Senile Encephalopathy Foundation, commonly known as ARSE, or ARSE. If you're over the age of 30, you've got ARSE. Don't feel bad now, because it's only going to get worse from here. Feel bad in the future. You can't stop ARSE. ARSE is inevitable. You're clumsy? You've got ARSE. Constantly missing your mouth and getting stewed prunes on your suspenders? You've got ARSE. Are you forgetting to wear your suspenders and your pants keep falling down? You've got ARSE. You're not getting any younger. You're falling apart. You've got some arse on you. If you or someone you know has been afflicted by this terrible disease, you can help by sending donations via PayPal to evildonebadly@gmail.com. Now, you might say to yourself, hey, that sounds suspiciously like the Evil Done Badly official email address. Well, it is. Send your donations there, and we will make sure it gets to someone suffering from the dreaded ARSE. It's a very worthwhile cause. And if you're not already, you can still join the wide world of paranormal investigations group on Facebook. Join us as we discuss fun things like witchcraft, spaceships, and cults. Welcome, traveler. You'll love it here. Sell your children and possessions. Quit your job. We're your family now. Have a flower. Join us at the wide world of paranormal investigations. We're real friendly around here. Now back to the show. Just a bit of a warning now. You might need multiple beverages to get through this one. This one's a long one, by our standards anyway. In case you're not aware, the Zodiac Killer is the self-given pseudonym of an unknown cunt face who murdered people in California in the late 60s. The one thing we can be reasonably sure of is that the perpetrator is male. So that doesn't narrow down the possible suspect list at all. He has 5 confirmed victims, 2 victims with serious injuries, and claims to have killed 37. Something tells me that's horse shit. If his counting is anything like his grammar, which we'll discover later, his estimate is way off. He's probably responsible for at least the 5 we're talking about, but I strongly believe he's pulling an Enron on his numbers here. Now, let's get started with the first known attack. It's known as the Lake Herman Road Murders. So, these first murders were the shootings of high school students Betty Lou Jensen and David Arthur Faraday on December 20th, 1968 on Lake Herman Road. The couple were on their first date and visited a friend before stopping at a local restaurant and driving out on Lake Herman Road. Faraday parked his mother's Rambler in a well-known makeout spot. It seems that someone pulled up beside them, got out, and went over to the driver's side of the Rambler. It's postulated that the killer ordered them out of the car by gunpoint and shot the young man in the head as he was getting out. He would then slump over and instantly be dead. He then turned the gun on Betty Lou as she tried to run away, hitting her 5 times in the back. She had managed to flee only about 28 feet before succumbing to her wounds. Shortly after 11 p.m., their bodies were found by Stella Borges, who lived nearby. With little to go on, the investigation would stall and yield nothing terribly useful. Okay, so that's 1 attempted murder, and he got both of them, so that's 2. Now this cunt is just jealous that he had nobody to make out with himself, and he took it out on poor David and Betty Lou. He was a fucking incel before they were called incels, and that's a touchy subject we will be getting into in the near future. On July 4th, 1969, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Maggio drove into the Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. It's only 4 miles from Lake Herman. The two were sat in the car when something peculiar happened. Another car drove up next to them and then took off almost immediately. Now, they found it odd, but not odd enough to be weirded out to the point where they would just leave and find somewhere else to get frisky. The suspicious vehicle would come back 10 minutes later and park behind them in the lot. Okay, now, that just goes from weird to flat out fucking terrifying. The driver gets out of the car and approaches on the passenger side. He shined, is that right? Shoned? Whatever. He pointed a goddamn flashlight in through the window and fired 5 shots. Some of the bullets went clean through Michael and into Darlene. The assailant would walk away, but would return and fire 2 more shots at each victim before driving off. It was when the killer returned that Michael got a look at his attacker and gave a description to the police. Michael was shot 4 times and survived. Darlene was shot a total of 9 times and pronounced dead at the hospital. Maggio described his attacker as a 26 to 30-year-old man, 195, 200 pounds, about 5'8", and a white guy with short, light brown curly hair. Now that's a pretty damn good description for someone who had just taken a bunch of bullets. After about a half hour, police would receive a call from someone who claimed to be the gunman, and he also claimed to be responsible for the Faraday Jensen murders. Police traced the call to a gas station phone booth, which turned out to be only a half kilometer from Ferrin's home. Now, right here we do get a short-lived theory about who it might be. It turns out Darlene was married, and not to Michael Maggio. So Darlene's husband was immediately looked into as a suspect, but quickly ruled out. According to Maggio, they were parked in the secluded area to talk. I don't care what you guys were doing in that car, Michael. Married, unmarried, whatever. That's none of my business. But what happened to you guys is fucking brutal. No one should have to deal with that. Moving on. On August 1st, 1969, 3 California newspapers received letters from someone claiming to be responsible for both sets of shootings. Each one contained parts of a coded cryptogram and demanded that each be printed on the front page of the respective papers, or else he would cruise around all weekend killing people. He also claimed that solving the puzzle would identify who he was. Now, one paper printed their part of the cipher on page 4, and the other 2 held back, demanding more info from the writer of the cryptograms to prove that he was the actual shooter. The weekend would pass without any murders, despite the fact that the papers did not follow his orders. Now, on August 7th, 1969, the San Francisco Examiner received another letter in which he stated, "This is the Zodiac speaking." Now, this is the first time he referred to himself as Zodiac, and he included details that only the real murderer would have known about the killings. He proved right here that he wasn't fucking around and that he was the real deal. He also said that "they will never have me," referring to his identification when the cipher was solved. So we will see how this plays out. Soon after the ciphers were published, the cryptogram was solved. Donald and Betty Harden cracked it on August 8th, and it goes like this. Quote, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill. Something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all that I have killed will become my slaves, and I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or atop my collectiog of slaves for my afterlife. Ebiorieti methipiti." End quote. Now that's some gibberish there at the end. I'm not an expert at solving things, but unless this guy's name is Ebiorieti methylolopithi, I don't think he revealed who he was. You know what? I bet it's an anagram for something. Let's try and solve this puzzle right now. You're witnessing history here, folks. We're going to decipher this conundrum right here on the worst podcast on the internet, Evil Done Badly. So let's figure this shit out. Now, what can I make from these stupid letters? Move that around here, slide that over. Better be pot meth teeth. Okay, that doesn't sound very useful. Let's try this again. Move that over there. The home tree meat pie toe. I don't think that says a lot. Moving on. Home mom titty petter. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. I could be onto something here. I'm just going to go ahead and forward these to the FBI. This is the kind of info that could blow this case wide fucking open. Now, what else can I say about this cipher? This person clearly has no idea how to spell and has a serious dislike of periods. For some reason, this guy thinks he can kill people on Earth and have their souls be his slaves in the afterlife. That's the type of bonkers we're dealing with here. If someone killed me here on Earth, I don't think I'd be too thrilled to be this person's slave in the afterlife. I'd probably tell them to go fuck themselves. But here I am, I'm trying to logic out the crazy here. It's not going to make any sense no matter what you do with it. I also don't believe he ever got his rocks off with a girl before either. What's super amazing to me is that these people cracked the code, even with his shitty grammar. Half the words aren't spelled right, and that's got to make code breaking a whole lot more impossible. Now, maybe that's all part of this dunderhead's plan. Maybe this fucker is not as dumb as he seems. Maybe he's a genius after all. I don't think so. He's just a cunt who needs to go back to elementary school. But, yeah. Don't let him around any kids, though. Moving on. Next murder. The next murder is called the Lake Berryessa murder. On September 27th, 1969, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking at Lake Berryessa. A white man, about 5'11", approached them wearing a black executioner's hood with sunglasses over the eye holes and a white crosshair symbol on his chest. He approached them with a gun and said that he was an escaped convict from a jail where he had killed a guard and stolen a car. It's a pretty elaborate story for somebody who just wants to kill people. He said that he needed their car and money to travel to Mexico. Now, I think they said something like, okay, take my money and car, have fun in Mexico. But that didn't seem to matter. The killer had bought pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline and had Cecilia tie Brian up. The killer double-checked the restraints and retightened Hartnell's bonds. The killer didn't think that Cecilia had done a satisfactory job of handcuffing Brian, so he had to double-check. With both victims' hands tied behind their backs, the man drew a knife and stabbed them both repeatedly. Brian was stabbed 6 times and Cecilia 10. After the stabbing, the killer hiked 500 yards up to Hartnell's car and drew the cross circle symbol on the door with a black felt tip pen and wrote beneath it, Vallejo 12/20/68, 7/4/69, which are the dates of the other sets of murders, and September 27th, 69, 6:30 by knife, referring to the current murder in progress. At 7:40 p.m., the killer called the Napa County Sheriff's Office from a payphone to report his latest crime. When the operator answered, the killer stated that he wished to, quote, report a murder. No, a double murder, end quote, before saying that he had committed the crime. The phone booth was 27 miles from the crime scene. Detectives lifted a palm print from the telephone, but were never able to match it to any suspect. Now, Shepard was conscious when help arrived and provided them with a detailed description of the attacker. They were taken to hospital, but Cecilia fell into a coma during transport and died 2 days later. Hartnell would go on to survive and tell his story. So far, we've got 4 dead and 2 seriously injured. Moving on. The Presidio Heights murder. On October 11th, 1969, a white male passenger entered the cab driven by Paul Stein in San Francisco. For reasons unknown, Stein drove 1 block past the passenger's requested location. When the car came to a stop, the passenger shot Stein once in the head with a 9mm handgun. He then took the driver's wallet and car keys and tore away the section of his blood-stained shirt tail. He would then give the cab a quick wipe down before walking away. Now this is where it gets a little screwy. It gets screwy because 3 teenagers actually witnessed this happening and called the police while it was all going down. The teenagers gave a description over the phone and told them what direction the shooter was heading. So far, that all seems pretty good. Patrol officers Don Fook and Eric Zelms responded to the call and observed a white man walking along suspiciously in the general direction of where the caller said the killer was going. That sounds even better. We're on to something. This suspicious man also matched the description the callers had given as well, apart from one tiny detail. The police dispatcher had told them to be on the lookout for a black suspect. So the white man walked away unscathed, suspicious as he was. No one has ever been able to give a legitimate answer as to why the descriptions got fucked up in such an obvious way. I suspect there might have been a little racism going on somewhere in the line of communication. That's just a hunch. And no one's ever going to admit to that, so that all makes sense. A search ensued, but no suspects were found. This would be the last officially confirmed murder by the Zodiac killer. But at the time, it was not immediately linked to the Zodiac case. On October 13th, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter from Zodiac taking credit for the killing and contained a torn section of Stein's bloody shirt. Once the link between all the murders was made, the 3 teen witnesses were brought in to prepare a composite sketch of the killer. On October 14th, another letter arrived at the Chronicle. This one made threats about shooting children on a school bus and contained more of Stein's shirt. On October 20th, someone claiming to be Zodiac called the Oakland Police Department demanding to speak to a lawyer on the AM San Francisco show with Jim Dunbar. Someone called the show multiple times and said he didn't want to go to the gas chamber so he wouldn't identify himself. He arranged a meeting with the lawyer, but predictably, nobody showed up for this meeting. These calls were traced to a patient at a mental institution and quickly ruled out as meaningful. On November 8, 1969, the Zodiac mailed a card with another cryptogram consisting of 340 characters. This cipher, dubbed Z340, remained unsolved for over 51 years, and we'll get back to that one now in a minute. On November 9th, 1969, the Zodiac mailed a 7-page letter stating that 2 policemen stopped and actually spoke with him 3 minutes after he shot Stein. That was most likely Fook and Zelms being confused by the man's whiteness. Fast forward a bit here. 51 years later, on December 5th, 2020, Z340 was deciphered by an international team of incredibly smart people. In the decrypted message, Zodiac denied being the man who phoned into the TV show and spoke on AM San Francisco. It explained that he was not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner. Now that's the made-up paradise that exists in his head, where his victims have been turned into his unwilling slaves. This newly deciphered cryptogram didn't reveal anything about Zodiac's real identity. At least 5 other murders/attacks have been suspected of being the work of Zodiac. None of them have been conclusively linked to him, but the attack on Kathleen Johns on March 22nd of 1970 was especially notable because she got away and she identified the man as matching the police drawing of the Zodiac that was done up from the Stein murder. Kathleen was 7 months pregnant and had her 10-month-old baby with her driving along near Modesto. A car drove up behind her and started honking the horn and flashing its headlights. Now, that's not something you want to see on a deserted highway in the dark. She pulled over and the man told her that she needed her lug nuts tightened because her wheel was wobbly. So he offered to tighten her nuts, and he got down and pretended to do so. She thanked him, and he drove off. She then tried to pull back onto the highway when the wheel, the same wheel that this jackass had claimed he had fixed, came clean off and went bouncing down the road. He, meaning the jackass, conveniently was still in the vicinity and offered to give Kathleen and her baby a ride to the nearest gas station. Now right here, I'd be like, "Hey, I saw how good you are at fixing wheels, you fucking jackass. I don't trust you to drive me anywhere, you creepy buffoon. Now piss off." Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm a cynic. Either way, she got in the car with him and the baby, and off they went. He passed several gas stations without stopping and drove around for 90 minutes. Every time she would ask him, "Hey, there's the gas station. What's the deal? Why aren't you stopping and letting me off?" he would just change the topic. Probably just talking about the weather, or trying to convince her he was actually really good at tightening lug nuts. I mean, the lug nuts were defective, honestly. And I mean, you can only pull that shit for so long. Like some other things. And eventually Kathleen said, "Fuck this," and took her baby and jumped out when he was stopped at an intersection. She hid in a field and waited for him to go away while he shouted at her and waved a flashlight around trying to coax her into coming back. When he did go away, Kathleen hitched a ride to the local police station to fill out a report. Now, I can only imagine what the fuck was going through her mind when she had to get into another car with yet another stranger. Like, holy shit, please, let this next person not be a fucking psycho. she would recognize the lug nut loosener from the sketch on the wall at the police station, and I think it's, kind of accepted that this dude was indeed Zodiac, but it's still debatable. When the police went out to look for Kathleen's car, they found it had been gutted and burned. It's probably by the same dude. Zodiac would spend the next year sending out letters to various papers and investigators, one of which included a letter that started with, "My name is," and then blank, 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 which was some 13-character puzzle that he made up. It remains unsolved. The shortness of this one makes it more or less impossible to crack without having a key. He also sent another 32-character cipher that was supposed to give the location of a bomb that was set to go off later in the year. No one figured out this cipher either, and the bomb has not been located or detonated. Now, this smells like horseshit to me as well. He did say in one of his letters that he was upset that no people were walking around wearing Zodiac buttons. Okay, you arrogant bastard. I'd like to see a pile of people walking around wearing Evil Done Badly buttons, but that ain't gonna happen either. Get over yourself. He then took credit for shooting a police officer who was giving out a parking ticket on June 9, 1970. The San Francisco Police Department claims that this particular killing has been ruled out as a Zodiac shooting. For whatever reason, the Zodiac stopped sending letters for the next 3 years. He started up writing letters again, informing everybody of how many people he had killed. In 1974, he would send one final letter to the Chronicle, in which he claimed 37 murders, and went on to talk about the movie The Exorcist and how silly it was. As far as we know, that's the end of Zodiac's crime spree. Why he stopped is anyone's guess. I figure he got heavily into disco and it preoccupied him long enough for him to forget about murdering people and writing letters. That's just my theory. I don't think anyone takes his 37 victim claim all that seriously. He was never caught and he was never identified. That's why we're looking for him. But we do have some suspects. The San Francisco Police Department has investigated an estimated 2,500 suspects over the decades. And we're going to look at all of them. And by all of them, I mean 4. Starting with Richard Gaikowski, or Dick Geik, as he liked to be called. He didn't become a serious suspect in the case until the late 80s. But right now, he's considered one of the frontrunners, probably in the top 2. There's a pile of circumstantial stuff that makes him look really bad, but I'll pick out the best ones here. He died in 2004, so I'll probably make up some shit to say about him too. Now, he lived less than 5 miles from the first confirmed Zodiac murders. Well, Jesus, if you narrow it down to the people in the vicinity, that's still a fuckload of people. That could be anybody. I mean, that could be you, dear listener. I don't trust any of you. Your taste in podcasts leaves you highly suspect. I'll be watching you. He also followed Darlene Ferrin across the country. She left California when she got married and moved to Albany, New York. Now, Geik moved there as well and started working in the same building as Darlene's husband. Then when she came back to California, he came back shortly after. She then wound up being killed in the car with Michael Maggio. Apparently, one of the deciphered ciphers makes reference to Albany Medical Center, further linking him to the case. Now, he was known to smoke weed and take acid. It was the late 60s. That's like saying he ate bread and drank milk. For fuck's sakes. He couldn't be more useless. But he did work at a counterculture newspaper called Good Times that used to run stories of fictional violence. These tales resemble later Zodiac crimes to an extent that goes beyond pure coincidence. And I'll admit, that's kind of compelling. He allegedly attended Paul Stein's funeral. Now, Paul was the cab driver who got shot in the head. Good Times had an office only yards away from Paul's residence. There was only one Geikowski in the phone book at the time of the Stein murder, and this was Geik's cousin. She lived on the same street that Stein was murdered on, and Stein was murdered on his cousin's birthday, so he had plenty of reasons to be in the immediate area. Things are starting to look a little bad here for old Dickie. A police dispatcher also matched his voice to the Zodiac's on one of his calls. That's kind of damning. Damning? Whatever. It makes him look fucking guilty. The 3-year gap in between letters from the Zodiac also coincided with Geik's stay in a mental institution. Could explain why he stopped being the Zodiac. He was too doped up afterwards and decided it was no longer worth the trouble. That's just my theory. Maybe he had part of his brain taken out and he couldn't remember why he thought being Zodiac was fun. Anything's possible. The later Zodiac letters tended to reference current movies. Geik was working at a theater at the time and was considered a movie buff. This seems a bit flimsy to me. Millions of buffs see billions of movies every day. Handwriting analysis on Dickie Geik here came back inconclusive. So there's nothing earth-shattering there. I'm not sure why I even brought up the handwriting. In any event, in 1986, the police were urged to look into Dickie. He was placed under surveillance for a few days and had a background check done on him. The matter was subsequently dropped when the snooping didn't turn up anything they could arrest him for. He's still a top contender for the role of Zodiac, though. But by far the most famous suspect in the case is Arthur Lee Allen. His link to the killings even predates the canonical murders. One of the suspected, unproven Zodiac killings has his handiwork all over it. Cherry Joe Bates was stabbed to death at Riverside College. He admitted to being in the area at the time and missed his only day of work 2 days after the murder. On that day, the murder was on October 30th, and he took a sick day on November 1st. The 1st was probably a Monday, and the murder probably happened on a Saturday. Now that's the kind of hard-nosed research we do around here. We guess at the days of the week. You can't get this kind of factual uncertainty on just any other podcast, folks. We're good at what we do. Thanks for coming along. Also, the killer sent 2 confession letters to the police and the paper, which is a very Zodiac thing to do. The printing on the letters was matched to a certain kind of ink and typewriter, and in 1991, they seized the exact type of writer from Allen's house. I'm not sure why it took them more than 20 years to confiscate his typewriter, but I'm not here to judge. Unless someone's being a cunt, if you're being a cunt, then I will judge you as I see fit, but that's another story. According to Allen's brother, he was given a Zodiac brand watch before the killing started, and the symbol on the watch was the same crosshair one that the killer wore to the Lake Berryessa murder and was signing his letters with. He wore this watch until it, too, was confiscated in 1991. He told friends he was writing a book, and pretty much spelled out how the murders would be carried out and how the guy in the book would evade capture. This guy is really not helping his case here. He had access to weird symbols and was familiar with code making and breaking and stuff. He was an elementary school teacher. So, Allen, if he's the killer, didn't have bad grammar after all, or else he's teaching all the kids wrong. Turns out, he was fond of intentionally misspelling words, which carried over to the ciphers, if it was him doing it. He may have not had bad grammar, but he did have bad manners. He was fired in 1968 for molesting a student. He had to move back in with his parents, put on a bunch of weight and developed a drinking problem. It's very bad signs. He lived only 7 minutes from the Lake Herman murders, and the search warrant issued in 1991 revealed that he owned the same type of ammunition that was used in the attack. Brian Hartnell, survivor of the Lake Berryessa knife attack, was taken to see Allen in the mid-70s and said him and his voice matched the masked man who stabbed him's voice and body. So there you go, positive ID. The shoe prints lifted from the crime scene were size 10.5, same as Allen's. Jesus Christ, this is really piling up here. Now, let's see what else Allen is up to. A neighbor who didn't like him told the police that he would go into San Francisco and kill a cabbie to prove he was the Zodiac. And this was before the murder of Paul Stein. So, holy shit. Another strange coincidence is that Allen was arrested in 1974 on more molestation charges. This coincides with the end of the Zodiac letters. The 1991 search warrant turned up tons of explosives and weapons and stuff. And Allen starts getting pissed off and doing interviews and trying to clear his name. And in 1992, Michael Maggio picked Allen out of a police lineup. "That's the cunt who shot me," he screamed out. Or something like that. So what we have here is a mountain of circumstantial evidence that this guy has to try and talk his way out of. I don't think it worked. He died in 1992 at the age of 58, still proclaiming his innocence with almost everyone on the planet looking at him like he was a big old murderous cunt. It's hard to blame them. This guy looks awful guilty. Richard Marshall is the third most acclaimed suspect of the bunch. He was actually born Joe Don Dickey in Lubbock, Texas. With a name like that, I'm pretty sure he did it. You can't trust those Dickies. I'm pretty sure I'd change my name too if I was born Joe Don Dickey. Apparently, he used to alternate between the two names for no good reason. He used to move around his date of birth as well, whenever it was convenient. So he was probably always on the run from something, and found it easier to get away by bouncing back and forth between identities. I have no idea if he was actually on the run from something. I'm just guessing. The fact that he's on this list at all makes me think he's a fucking slimeball. So let's see what kind of a lowlife we're dealing with here. During the Zodiac's crime spree in 68 and 69, he lived in San Francisco. Ding, ding, ding. Well, lock this fucker up. He lived in San Francisco. What a dirtbag. Okay. There's got to be more to it than that. He worked at a silent film theater. Jesus Christ. I hope we got better reasons than this to be dragging this bastard's name through the mud here. A handwritten movie poster that he designed for the cinema had writing that resembled Zodiac's. Well, at least that's something. He was also working at a different theater in Marin County, which is near San Francisco. This particular theater was showing a movie called The Red Phantom at the time. A couple of months later, a Zodiac letter was mailed from Marin County, wherein the Zodiac called himself the Red Phantom. He had never mailed a letter from there before or after, and he never called himself the Red Phantom before or after either. My first thought here is, how do we know this Red Phantom dude is an official Zodiac type of correspondence person here? It may very well be, but I find it a little weird that Zodiac will be so self-involved with getting people to know him as the Zodiac and wear buttons and shit that he would change his name all of a sudden. He wanted to build his legacy as Zodiac. I doubt he would call himself something different because he saw a stupid movie. I mean, the movie's probably fine, but still. But what do I know? I run a terrible podcast. My opinion counts for less than nothing. Moving on. Joe Dickey became a suspect in 1976 after making suspicious comments over his ham radio. I have no idea what they were, but for them to take it seriously enough to interview him, it had to be pretty shady sounding. I imagine most stuff on ham radios was pretty shady when you think about it. In the interview, he said, "No, I'm not the Zodiac killer. Holy shit, I thought we had him. Nope. In 2008, an employee at a care center in Sacramento found him to be kind of weird, and he was acting strange and talking about the Zodiac case. A couple of officers were sent to check up on him, but they came to the conclusion that Marshall was likely not the Zodiac killer. I'm also coming to that conclusion, and I'm putting this guy in a distant third place. Compared to the pile of evidence they've got stacked up against these other two bozos, this guy's not even in the same ballpark. Viable suspect number 4, Lawrence Kane was born a Taurus in 1924 and had a long criminal record. He also had brain damage in 1962, which made it hard for him to control his impulses. Okay, so this guy seems capable of anything. Seems promising. Also, how can you trust a Taurus? I had a Taurus once. It was mint green and had Beanie Babies all over it. Talk about your sexy automobile. Now, Pam Huckabee, the sister of victim Darlene Ferrin, said that Kane had been stalking Darlene in the months leading up to the killing. Okay, that's pretty unnerving. At least that's a direct link to one of the victims. This guy is definitely stepping up to the plate here. Now, he wrote a story in the 1940s that mentioned the words Zodiac and fiendish methods of torture. How anyone found this is crazy to me, but it strikes me as more of a silly coincidence and doesn't really prove anything. Complicating things even more, Kathleen Johns, the girl with the baby who escaped from possibly Zodiac's car, picked Larry out of a lineup. She also said that the man in the police drawing was the guy, so both of those things can't really be true. Of course, it's possible that the whole incident was not Zodiac related at all. So she could have identified her attacker, yes, but him and the Zodiac might not have been the same cunt. Funny thing is, Zodiac would write a letter later on talking about his involvement in the attempted abduction of Kathleen Johns. That seems something the Zodiac is likely to do, yep. But for this one, he didn't go into any, level of detail and didn't go out of his way to prove that it was him. It was uncharacteristic of his methods, to the point that it's entirely likely he may have just been stealing credit for some other fucker's kidnapping attempt. Who knows? Larry Kane seems like a real fucking piece of work, but I don't consider him one of the frontrunners for the title of Real Zodiac, but who the fuck knows? All these suspects are dead now, and we may never uncover the truth. But as long as internet sleuths are digging into the minutiae concerning the killings, who knows what they will dredge up. I hope it does get definitively solved, and there is some sort of closure to this case. The families deserve it. Speaking of internet sleuths, check out ZodiacKiller.com for all the minutiae you could ever imagine about the Zodiac case. The site is mind-bogglingly chock full of details and will keep you enthralled for days. Holy fucking shit, this guy has done his homework. Thank you, sir. I had a great time poking around in there. And I hope you've all had a great time on our true crime adventure here today. It's been a fascinating look into the crazy world of the unsolved Zodiac killings from the late 60s in San Francisco. And thanks again to Jeff G for suggesting this topic. I had a ball writing it. And by writing it, I mean plagiarizing other websites and adding in my inane commentary. Either way, I'm glad to have you along, and I hope to see you back next time. If you would like to suggest future topics, I can be reached on Instagram at evildonebadly or by email at evildonebadly@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Adios.